modern world knows it as a place of absolute stillness, a sanctuary of pristine white marble where millions of souls move in silent, uniform circles around a single structure of black stone. But if we could shatter the glass of time and step back into the closing decades of the 6th century, we would find a Makkah that was anything but still. We would enter a valley of suffocating heat, trapped between jagged, volcanic hills. A city built on 2 volatile foundations, immense mercantile wealth and an intricate web of tribal polytheism. At the center of this world stood the Kaaba. But it was not the sanctuary of monotheism built by Abraham. It had been transformed into a spiritual marketplace, housing 360 idols. One for every day of the lunar year. Stone statues, wooden figures, and tribal totems carved from the finest rock or crude clay looked down upon the desert nomads. Here, the gods were transactional. You prayed to Hubal for rain before a caravan departed. You sacrificed to Al-Lat, Al-Uzza, and Manat for victory in war, for healthy children, or for protection against the unforgiving desert spirits. Religion was not a moral compass, it was a business model. And the absolute masters of this business were the Quraysh. To fully comprehend why the birth of a new faith in this valley triggered an earth-shattering revolution, one must understand the wider world of the late 6th century. The globe was dominated by 2 decaying superpowers, the Christian Byzantine Empire in the west and the Zoroastrian Sasanian Persian Empire in the east. For decades, these 2 titans had locked themselves in a brutal war of attrition, draining their treasuries and devastating the traditional trade routes through the Fertile Crescent. As the northern trade routes became active war zones, merchants looked south to the forbidding, desolate landscape of the Arabian Peninsula. The barren strip of land known as the Hijaz, previously ignored by global empires because of its harsh climate, suddenly became the vital transit corridor for global commerce. The Quraysh were not just a tribe, they were an elite mercantile oligarchy. By exploiting Makkah's geographic position, midway between the wealthy markets of Gaza and Damascus in the north and the spice kingdoms of Yemen in the south, they turned a barren desert outpost into the trade capital of Western Arabia. Crucially, they established the Ashhur al-Hurum, the 4 sacred months of peace. During these months, all tribal warfare across the blood-soaked Arabian Peninsula was strictly forbidden. Nomads, warriors, poets, and bandits from every corner of the desert marched into Makkah completely unarmed. They came to trade their goods, settle their blood feuds through poetry, and worship their tribal idols at the Kaaba. The Quraysh held the keys to this entire system. They held the right of Sumayyah, providing water from the sacred well of Zamzam, and Rafada, feeding the thousands of pilgrims who flooded the valley. To challenge the idols of Makkah was not simply to challenge a theology. It was to threaten the financial, political, and structural survival of the most powerful elite in Arabia. It was into this volatile, deeply stratified society that an orphan was born. A child whose life would not only rewrite the destiny of this valley, but shatter the geopolitical balance of the ancient world forever. The family into which the child would be born was the Banu Hashim, a clan of immense nobility but declining financial power. The prestige of the family had been secured decades earlier by Abdul Muttalib, the grandfather of the Prophet. For generations, the exact location of the ancient well of Zamzam, originally brought forth for Hagar and her infant son Ishmael, had been lost to history, buried under centuries of shifting sands and tribal wars. According to historical records, Abdul Muttalib received a series of vivid dreams directing him to dig at a specific spot between the 2 idols of Izaf and Enailah, near the sacrificial slaughter site of the Quraysh. Armed with nothing but a single shovel and accompanied by his only son at the time, Al-Harith, Abdul Muttalib began digging into the hard earth. The other clans of the Quraysh mocked him, declaring that he had lost his mind. But on the third day of digging, Muttalib struck the stone lining of the ancient well and shouted Allahu Akbar. Water bubbled up from the depths of the dry valley. Along with the water, he unearthed buried treasures of golden swords, armor, and silver plaques left behind by ancient tribes. This discovery restored the structural supremacy of the Banu Hashim. Abdul Muttalib now held absolute control over the water supply of Makkah, making him the de facto patriarch of the city. Yet, the old chief faced another profound crisis. He had vowed to the gods that if they blessed him with 10 adult sons to protect him, he would sacrifice one of them at the Kaaba to show his devotion. Years passed, and Abdul Muttalib was indeed blessed with 10 strong, noble sons. Remembering his solemn vow, he gathered them at the Kaaba to draw lots using the sacred divination arrows of the priest of Hubal. The arrow was spun, and it pointed directly to his youngest, most handsome, and most beloved son, Abdullah. Abdul Muttalib took his son by the hand and raised a sacrificial knife. The crowd of Makkah gathered in an uproar. The chieftains of the other clans stopped him, warning that if he sacrificed his son, it would set a catastrophic precedent that every father in Arabia would feel obligated to follow. They advised him to consult a wise sorceress in the north to find an alternative. The sorceress instructed Abdul Muttalib to cast lots between the life of his son and 10 camels, the standard blood money for a human life. If the arrow pointed to Abdullah, he must add 10 more camels and spin again, repeating the process until the gods accepted the animal sacrifice. Abdul Muttalib returned to Makkah and began the ritual. The arrow pointed to Abdullah. He added 10 camels. The arrow pointed to Abdullah again. 30, 40, 50, 60 camels were added. It was not until the tally reached 100 camels that the divination arrow finally pointed away from the young man and toward the livestock. The 100 camels were slaughtered, and their meat was left for the poor of Makkah. Abdullah's life was spared. This young man, Abdullah, would grow up to marry Amina bint Wahb, a woman of high noble lineage from Yathrib. But the life that had been bought with 100 camels was destined to be tragically brief. Shortly after the marriage, Abdullah departed with a trading caravan heading north to Syria. On the return journey, he fell violently ill and was forced to stop in the oasis town of Yathrib to recover under the care of his maternal uncles. He died there weeks later, leaving behind a young, pregnant widow and a modest inheritance of 5 camels and a single Abyssinian slave girl named Baraka. In the year 570 of the Christian calendar, Amina gave birth to a son. Abdul Muttalib carried his newborn grandson into the inner sanctuary of the Kaaba, thanking God for this child who replaced his lost son. Breaking from tribal traditions, he named the boy Muhammad, a name completely uncommon in Arabia at the time, meaning the praised one. According to the ancient customs of the urban nobility of Makkah, newborns were not raised in the cramped, disease-prone alleys of the city. They were sent out into the high, clean air of the open desert to live with the nomadic Bedouins, where they would develop strong physical constitutions and learn the purest Arabic dialects. The infant was handed over to Halima bint Abi Duaib, a woman of the Banu Sad tribe. Halima's family was enduring a period of severe drought, her nursing camel was dry, and her own breasts yielded no milk for her own children. Yet, the historical texts note that from the moment she took the infant Muhammad into her arms, blessings flooded her household. Her camels' udders filled with milk, her dry lands turned green, and her livestock multiplied rapidly. In the desert, the young boy learned the survival skills of the nomad, developing a constitution hardened by the elements. But tragedy, it seemed, stalked his early years. At the age of 6, shortly after returning to his biological mother, Amina took him to visit his father's grave in Yathrib. On the return journey across the blistering sands, she fell gravely ill. At a desolate outpost known as al-Abwa, she drew her last breath, leaving her 6-year-old son standing over her desert grave. Brought back to Makkah by the loyal servant Baraka, the boy was taken in by his grandfather, Abdul Muttalib. For 2 years, the elderly patriarch shielded the child, seating him on his private cushion in the shade of the Kaaba, a privilege denied even to his adult sons. But when the boy turned 8, Abdul Muttalib also passed away. The guardianship then fell to his paternal uncle, Abu Talib. Though rich in honor and tribal respect, Abu Talib was a man of modest financial means, burdened with a large family. To ease his uncle's financial strain, the young nephew became a shepherd. Tending sheep on the silent, rocky hillsides of Makkah was a formative school of patience, vigilance, and deep contemplation. Years later, he would remark to his companions that every single prophet sent by God had spent time as a shepherd. In the isolation of the hills, away from the roaring consumerism and clannish politics of Makkah, he watched the natural order. He observed the stars, the seasons, and the silent rhythm of the desert. As he grew into his teenage years, his uncle Abu Talib initiated him into the family business, the caravan trade. He traveled north to the great markets of Syria, learning the complex mechanics of international commerce. Yet, as he walked the streets of Makkah as a young adult, the people of the valley began to notice something entirely unique about him. In a society where cheating in business was considered a mark of cleverness, and where poetry was weaponized to destroy reputations, this young man never told a lie. He never broke a promise. He never participated in pagan rituals, nor did he ever consume wine or indulge in the vices that defined the youth of Makkah. Before he had ever spoken a single word about religion, the collective consensus of his fiercest peers awarded him 2 titles that carried the highest honor in the valley: as-Sadiq, the truthful, and al-Amin, the trustworthy. During his youth, Makkah was struck by an incident that exposed the deep moral failures of its tribal system. A merchant from the Yemen tribe of Zubayd arrived in Makkah with a valuable shipment of goods. A powerful Makkah nobleman named Al-Az ibn Wa'lanoy purchased the goods but completely refused to pay the agreed price. Because the Yemeni merchant was a foreigner without a tribal ally in Makkah, he had no legal recourse. Desperate, the merchant climbed the hill of Abu Qubays near the Kaaba at dawn, shouting an epic poem that called upon the men of honor to save him from open robbery in the sacred valley. The call shook the conscience of the noble clans. Representatives from the clans of Banu Hashim, Banu al-Muttalib, and Banu Zura gathered at the house of the wealthy elder Abdullah ibn Juddan. There, they established the Hilf al-Fudul, the alliance of virtue. They dipped their hands into the sacred water and swore by God that they would stand as a unified front against any oppressor in Makkah, regardless of their wealth or tribal power, until justice was restored to the victim. The young al-Amin was an active participant in this alliance, and decades later during his prophetic mission, he would look back at this pagan-era treaty and say, "I witnessed an alliance in the house of Abdullah ibn Juddan that was more beloved to me than a herd of red camels. If I were called to it today in Islam, I would surely respond." His stellar reputation for absolute integrity eventually caught the attention of one of the most powerful and sought-after entrepreneurs in Makkah, Khadijah bint Khuwaylid. A noblewoman of immense wealth and sharp business intellect, Khadijah was a twice-widowed merchant who managed her own vast trading empire, employing men to lead her caravans across dangerous terrains. She hired the 25-year-old al-Amin to lead her largest caravan to the markets of Basra in Syria, sending her trusted servant, Maysara, to accompany him. The expedition was a financial triumph, yielding double the expected profits. But when Maysara returned, He did not just report the financial ledger to Khadijah. He spoke in awe of the young man's character. He told her how he treated everyone with unmatched kindness, how he mediated disputes with profound wisdom, and how his integrity shone even in the chaotic, cutthroat markets of Syria. Khadijah, who had rejected proposals from the wealthiest and most powerful chieftains of the Quraysh, saw something rare in this young man. Breaking all societal conventions, she sent her close friend, Nafisa, to deliver a proposal of marriage. He accepted, consulting his uncle Abu Talib. The marriage between the 25-year-old Al-Amin and the 40-year-old Khadijah became a partnership of profound emotional depth, mutual respect, and absolute loyalty. It provided him with financial stability, allowing him to retreat even deeper into his natural inclination toward philosophical contemplation. 10 years into their marriage, when he was 35 years old, a crisis occurred that nearly plunged Makkah into an all-out civil war. A massive flash flood ripped through the valley, severely damaging the already fragile structure of the Kaaba. The clans of the Quraysh agreed to demolish the remaining walls and rebuild the sanctuary from its foundations using fine stone and timber from a shipwrecked Roman vessel. The construction proceeded smoothly until the moment arrived to place the Hajar Aswad, the ancient black stone, back into its designated corner. The black stone was the ultimate relic of prestige. Whichever clan placed it back would hold eternal bragging rights over all of Arabia. The chieftains clashed. Swords were drawn. For 5 days, all work ceased. The Banu Abdul clan brought a bowl filled with animal blood, and several clans dipped their hands into it, swearing a solemn oath that they would die before allowing another clan to take the honor. Finally, the oldest chief among them, Abu Umayyah ibn al-Mughira, stepped forward. He proposed a compromise: let the very next man who walks through the gate of the sanctuary arbitrate this dispute. The chieftains fell silent, their eyes locked onto the eastern gate. Hours passed. Then, a lone figure stepped through the archway. When the squabbling chiefs recognized his face, a collective sigh of relief echoed across the courtyard. They shouted in unison, "It is Al-Amin. We accept his judgment." He did not pick a winner, nor did he alienate any faction. Instead, he took off his cloak, spread it flat on the earth, and placed the black stone in the center. He then looked at the 4 rival chieftains and said, "Let the leader of each clan take hold of one corner of this cloak, and lift it together." Stunned by the brilliant simplicity of the solution, the chiefs stepped forward, each grasping a corner of the fabric. They lifted the relic together to its designated height. Then, with his own hands, he guided the black stone into its resting place within the masonry. With a single gesture of inclusive diplomacy, he had averted a catastrophic tribal war. Yet, despite his high standing, a profound sense of spiritual isolation was beginning to pull him away from the city entirely. As the years pressed on, the moral decay of Makkah became unbearable to him. He walked through the streets and saw a city obsessed with materialism. He saw the wealthy exploiting the poor, the systematic abuse of orphans, and the horrific practice of female infanticide, where fathers buried their newborn daughters alive in the desert sands out of tribal shame or fear of poverty. He looked at the idols surrounding the Kaaba and knew, with an innate clarity, that these silent blocks of stone could neither create, nor destroy, nor guide. He sought isolation. He began taking supplies of olive oil, dried meat, and water, and hiking miles outside the city up the steep, unforgiving terrain of Jabal an-Nu, the Mountain of Light. Near its summit lay the Cave of Hira. It was not a grand cavern, but a tiny, narrow cleft in the rock, barely large enough for a single man to lie down, looking out through a small opening directly toward the distant silhouette of the Kaaba. Here, for days and weeks at a time, particularly during the hot lunar month of Ramadan, he sat in absolute solitude. He engaged in tahanath, an ancient form of monotheistic meditation practiced by the few remaining Hanifs, the spiritual descendants of Abraham who rejected polytheism but lacked an organized revelation to guide them. He prayed for clarity. He searched the absolute silence of the mountain for an answer to the darkness enveloping his people. In the year 610, on a night that would later be enshrined in history as Laylat al-Qadr, the night of decree, the silence of the cave was shattered forever. Without warning, a presence materialized before him in the darkness. It was not a vision or a dream, but a terrifying reality. The archangel Gabriel, appeared in a form that filled the entire horizon. The angel looked upon the meditating 40-year-old man and delivered a single command. Iqra. Read. Terrified, his heart pounding violently against his ribs, he replied, Ma ana bikari, I am not of those who can read. The angel stepped forward, seized him, and squeezed him with such overwhelming force that he felt he could bear it no longer. Then, releasing him, the angel delivered the command a second time. Iqra. Read. Again, gasping for breath, he gave the same reply, I am not of those who can read. For a second time, the angel embraced him with crushing force, pushing him to the absolute limit of human endurance, before releasing him and demanding for the third time, Read. He asked, What shall I read? Then, the cave of Hira echoed with the first words of the final testament to mankind, words that would be memorized, chanted, and preserved by billions of people across centuries. Recite in the name of your Lord who created man from a clinging clot. Recite, and your Lord is the most generous, who taught by the pen, taught man that which he knew not. The voice fell silent. The presence vanished. The revelation was over, but the world had altered on its axis. He fled the cave, his heart shaking so violently that the space between his shoulders trembled. He rushed down the mountain slopes, terrified that he was losing his mind or had fallen under the influence of a desert spirit. He burst into his home and cried out to Khadijah, Zamiluni, Zamiluni, cover me, cover me. Khadijah wrapped him in a heavy cloak, holding him tight as the physical tremors slowly subsided. When he gained his composure, he looked at his wife with deep anguish and said, O Khadijah, I fear for myself. It was in this exact moment that Khadijah bint Khuwaylid earned her immortal place in history. She did not doubt him. She did not question his sanity. Instead, she looked into his eyes and spoke words of absolute, unshakable conviction. Never. By God, God will never disgrace you. You keep good relations with your family, you speak the truth, you help the poor and the destitute, you serve your guests generously, and you assist those who are afflicted by calamity. To seek further clarity, Khadijah took him to her cousin, Waraka ibn Nawfal. Waraka was an elderly Christian scholar who had spent his life studying the ancient Hebrew and Syriac scriptures, translating fragments of the Gospels into Arabic. He was now old and completely blind. As Waraka listened to the detailed account of the crushing embrace and the words recited in the cave, the old scholar's face grew pale. He leaned forward and exclaimed, This is the Namus, the keeper of secrets, the very same angel of revelation whom God sent down to Moses. I wish I were a young man when your people will drive you out of this city. He was startled by Waraka's words. He asked, Will they truly drive me out? Waraka replied solemnly, Yes. Never has a man brought what you have brought except that he was met with fierce hostility. If I should live to see that day, I will support you with all my strength." Days later, Waraka passed away. The initial spark of revelation was followed by a period of agonizing silence, the Fatra, where no revelations came for months. He returned to the mountain paths, waiting, until the angel returned, confirming his mission. The command shifted from read to arise and warn. The mission began in absolute secrecy. Makkah was not ready for a frontal assault on its entire socio-religious structure. For 3 years, he whispered the message to those he trusted most. The first to accept was Khadijah. Then, his 10-year-old cousin Ali ibn Abi Talib, who lived in his household. Then, his liberated slave and adopted son, Zayd ibn Haritha. But a critical turning point occurred when he shared the message with his lifelong friend, Abu Bakr ibn Abi Quhafa. Abu Bakr was a wealthy, highly respected cloth merchant known throughout Makkah for his deep knowledge of tribal genealogies and his impeccable character. Abu Bakr accepted Islam without a moment of hesitation. He immediately weaponized his social influence, bringing the brilliant youth of Makkah into the fold: Uthman ibn Affan, Zubair ibn Alawam, Abd-ul-Rahman ibn Auf, and Talha ibn Ubaydillah. They met secretly in the house of a young teenager named al-Arqam ibn Abi al-Arqam, tucked away near the hill of Safa. In this hidden assembly, the early believers listened to short, rhythmic Quranic verses that shattered their worldviews. These early chapters did not focus on complex legal codes, they focused on the absolute oneness of God, Tawhid, the reality of the Day of Judgment, and the absolute obligation to dismantle the socio-economic oppression of Makkah. For 3 years, the secret community grew to about 40 people. But the divine command could no longer be contained within the shadows. The time had come to confront the masters of the valley. In the 4th year of his mission, a clear command descended: proclaim openly what you have been commanded, and turn away from the polytheists. He climbed to the summit of Mount Safa, the prominent hill overlooking the Kaaba. In ancient Arabian custom, if a warrior climbed a hill and shouted "Ya Sabaha," it signaled that an enemy army was about to launch a surprise dawn attack on the valley. Hearing the urgent alarm from the highly respected Al-Amin, the leaders and citizens of Makkah dropped their tools and rushed to the base of the hill. He looked down at the crowd, seeing the chieftains of the Quraysh, including his own uncles. He called out, "O Quraysh! If I were to tell you that an enemy army was hiding behind this mountain, waiting to attack your city, would you believe me?" The crowd roared back, "Yes. We have never found you telling a lie." Then, the mountain path echoed with his public declaration, "Then know that I am a warner sent to you before a severe punishment. God has commanded me to call you to worship Him alone and to abandon your idols." The silence that followed was broken by a voice dripping with venom. His own uncle, Abu Lahab, stepped forward, threw a stone toward his nephew, and screamed, "Tabban laka sa'i'a al-yawm, Ali harda jamatana. May you perish for the rest of this day. Is this why you have gathered us?" The crowd dispersed in anger and mockery. The period of peaceful coexistence was officially dead. As the public preaching intensified, the leadership of the Quraysh, led by men like Abu Jahl, the father of ignorance, and Utbah ibn Rabi'ah, realized the existential threat of this message. The message of Islam declared that all human beings were fundamentally equal in the sight of God. It stated that a black Abyssinian slave was spiritually equal to the highest chieftain of the Quraysh. Furthermore, it declared that their ancestors who died in paganism were in error, and it threatened the lucrative pilgrim economy of the Kaaba. The oligarchy launched a multi-tiered campaign to crush the movement. First came psychological warfare and character assassination. The man they had called the trustworthy for 40 years was suddenly branded a madman, a sorcerer, and a poet spinning elaborate lies. They told travelers entering Makkah to put cotton in their ears so they wouldn't be possessed by his words. When that failed, they attempted political bribery. They sent Utbah ibn Rabi'ah to offer him a deal. If you want wealth, we will collect enough money to make you the richest man in Arabia. If you want political power, we will crown you our king. If you want women, we will marry you to the noblest daughters of the land. The only condition is that you stop insulting our gods. He listened patiently to the grand offer, before reciting the opening verses of Surah Fussilat, reasserting the absolute monotheism of the message. When Utbah returned to the council of the Quraysh, his face was changed. He told the chiefs, "Leave this man alone. For by God, the words I heard from him have a grandeur that nothing on earth can match." Realizing that wealth could not buy him out and mockery could not deter him, the Quraysh unleashed an era of systematic, brutal persecution. Because of the strict tribal codes of Arabia, they could not easily execute him without triggering a bloody, multi-generational blood feud with his protecting clan, the Banu Hashim under Abu Talib. Therefore, the oligarchy turned their fury upon the vulnerable, the poor, and the foreign slaves who had no tribal alliances to shield them. The sand dunes of Makkah became a theater of horror. Among them was Bilal ibn Rabah, an Abyssinian slave owned by the cruel chieftain Umayyah ibn Khalaf. When Umayyah discovered Bilal's secret conversion, he dragged him out to the desert at midday when the sand was hot enough to fry meat. He pinned Bilal flat on his back and ordered a massive, scorching volcanic rock to be placed directly onto his chest. Umayyah stood over him, screaming, "You will stay here until you die, or until you renounce Muhammad and worship al-Lat and al-Uzza." With his lungs being crushed under the weight of the stone, his tongue parched, and the desert heat melting his skin, Bilal did not yield. He raised a single finger toward the sky and rasped out a single word, "Ahad. Ahad. One. One." Hearing of this torture, Abu Bakr rushed to the desert plain and purchased Bilal at an exorbitant price, liberating him on the spot. The brutality expanded daily. Khabbab ibn al-Arat, a highly skilled blacksmith and early convert, was tortured by his female owner, Anmar. She would take the glowing, red-hot iron tools from his own forge and press them directly onto his bare back to force him to renounce Islam. Khabbab later showed his scars to Umar ibn al-Khattab. His skin had been burned away completely, leaving deep, ghostly white furrows where the fat of his body had extinguished the burning charcoal. Others were not as fortunate to find immediate rescue. The family of Yasir, foreign Yemenis with no tribal protection, were tied to posts under the blistering sun. He would walk past them as they were being tortured, unable to physically fight back due to their minority numbers. He could only comfort them with words, "Patience, O family of Yasir, for your appointed meeting place is paradise." Yasir died under the weight of the torture. His wife, Sumayyah, was stepped forward by Abu Jahl. When she refused to insult the Prophet, Abu Jahl executed her brutally with a spear. Sumayyah bint Kayat became the very first martyr of Islam. Seeing his companions being crushed by this relentless iron furnace, the Prophet looked across the Red Sea and advised a small group of 80 believers to flee Makkah entirely. If you were to go to Abyssinia, you would find there a king under whom no one is wronged. It is a land of righteousness, until God provides a way out for you. This was the first hijra, the migration to Africa. The Quraysh were furious that their victims had escaped their jurisdiction. They immediately dispatched two of their most brilliant diplomats, Amr ibn al-As and Abdullah ibn Abi Rabi'ah, loaded with expensive gifts of fine leather for the Abyssinian generals and King Negus, Najashi. Amr ibn al-As stood before the king and demanded the extradition of the refugees, claiming they were foolish youths who had abandoned the faith of their forefathers and invented a dangerous new heresy that insulted both paganism and Christianity. The Christian King Negus, known for his absolute justice, refused to hand them over without a fair trial. He summoned the Muslim refugees to his court. The Muslims chose Ja'far ibn Abi Talib, the older brother of Ali, to speak on their behalf. Ja'far stepped forward, stood before the king, and delivered an epic defense that encapsulated the entire revolution of Islam. "O king, we were an ignorant people. We worshipped idols, we ate carcasses, we committed abominations, we broke the ties of kinship, we treated our neighbors badly, and the strong among us devoured the weak. We stayed in this condition until God sent a prophet to us from among ourselves. We knew his descent, his truthfulness, his honesty, and his purity. He called us to unique monotheism, to abandon the stones and idols our fathers worshipped. He commanded us to speak the truth, to keep our trusts, to maintain family ties, to be good neighbors, and to abstain from sins and bloodshed." The king listened intently, his interest caught by the moral clarity of the words. He asked, "Do you have with you any of the revelation that your prophet brought from God?" Ja'far replied, "Yes." Najashi commanded, "Recite it to me." Ja'far began reciting the opening verses of Surah Maryam, the chapter detailing the miraculous birth of Jesus Christ to the Virgin Mary. As the rhythmic, majestic Arabic verses filled the stone court, describing the purity of Mary and the speech of the infant Jesus in the cradle, King Negus began to weep openly. The tears soaked his royal beard. The Christian bishops fell to their knees in tears. When the recitation ended, Najashi took a stick from the ground, drew a thin line in the dirt, and declared, "By God, what you have brought and what Jesus brought come from the very same source of light." This line represents the only difference between our understandings. Turning to the diplomats of the Quraysh, he threw their gifts of leather back at their feet and said, "Get out of my court. By God, I will never hand these people over to you, and they are safe in my kingdom forever." The first external political victory for Islam had been won on African soil. While the refugees found safety in Abyssinia, the conflict in Makkah reached a dangerous climax. The Quraysh escalated their direct physical harassment of the Prophet himself. One afternoon, Abu Jahl spotted the Prophet sitting quietly near the hill of Safa. Abu Jahl approached him and launched into a tirade of vile, abusive insults, mocking his mission and cursing his lineage. The Prophet remained completely silent, refusing to dignify the tyrant with a response. Abu Jahl then picked up a stone and struck him over the head, causing him to bleed, before marching off arrogantly to join his council at the Kaaba. A slave woman belonging to Abdullah ibn Juddan witnessed the entire assault from her window. Shortly after, Hamza ibn Abdul Muttalib, the paternal uncle of the Prophet, returned from a hunting trip in the desert, his massive bow slung over his shoulder. Hamza was known as one of the fiercest warriors and strongest wrestling champions of the Quraysh. Though he had not yet accepted Islam, his tribal pride was immense. The slave woman approached Hamza and said, "O Abu Umara, I wish you had seen what Abu Jahl did to your nephew just an hour ago. He insulted him and struck him until he bled, and your nephew did nothing." Hamza's eyes filled with primal rage. Without even going home to unpack his hunting gear, he marched directly into the courtyard of the Kaaba, where the elite chiefs of the Quraysh were seated. Hamza walked straight up to Abu Jahl, raised his heavy wooden hunting bow, and smashed it across Abu Jahl's face with such force that the wood cracked and blood poured down Abu Jahl's clothes. Hamza stood over the bleeding chief and bellowed for all to hear, "Do you dare insult him? Know that I have accepted his religion. I follow what he says. Strike me back if you have the courage." Warriors from Abu Jahl's clan rose to attack Hamza, but Abu Jahl, trembling with fear at Hamza's fury, held them back, saying, "Leave Abu Umara alone, for by God, I insulted his nephew deeply." Hamza's conversion provided the movement with its first elite military shield. Days after Hamza's conversion, an even greater shockwave struck Makkah. Umar ibn al-Khattab, a young, towering nobleman known for his fierce temper, administrative intellect, and absolute hatred of Islam, decided that the only way to save Makkah from division was to personally assassinate the Prophet. Armed with an unsheathed broadsword, Umar strode through the city streets. On his way, he was intercepted by Nuaym ibn Abdullah, a secret convert, who saw the murderous look on Umar's face and asked, "Where are you going, O Umar?" Umar replied, "I am going to kill Muhammad, the man who has divided the Quraysh, ruined our traditions, and cursed our gods." Nuaym, trying to divert Umar from his target, laughed and said, "You deceive yourself, Umar. Do you think the Banu Hashim will let you walk the earth if you kill their man? Why don't you fix your own household first?" Umar stopped in his tracks, his sword dripping rainwater. "What do you mean my own household?" Nuaym revealed the secret. "Your sister Fatima and her husband Sa'idi ibn Zayd have both abandoned your ancestral gods and followed Muhammad." Blinded by humiliation and rage, Umar changed direction and charged into the house of his sister Fatima. As he approached the door, he heard the low, melodic sound of a scriptural recitation inside. The companion Khabbab was teaching them a newly revealed chapter from a leather parchment. Umar kicked the door open. Khabbab scrambled to hide in a closet, and Fatima hid the parchment behind her back. Umar roared, "What was that nonsense I heard you reciting?" Sa'idi replied, "It was nothing, just us talking." Umar barked, "I have been informed that you have both become renegades." He lunged at Sa'idi, slamming him to the ground and pinning him. Fatima rushed forward to pull her massive brother away, but Umar swung his heavy hand, striking his sister across the face so hard that her lips split open and blood pooled down her chin. Instead of cowering, Fatima stood up, looked her brother in the eye with absolute defiance, and shouted, "Yes. We are Muslims. We believe in God and His Messenger. Do whatever you want, Umar, but we will never give up our faith." Umar looked at the blood dripping from his sister's face, and the iron walls of his heart collapsed. A profound sense of shame washed over him. He stepped back from Sa'idi and said in a quiet voice, "Give me that parchment you were reading, so I can see what this man has brought." Fatima refused, saying, "You are unclean in your paganism, and none shall touch it except the purified. Go wash yourself first." Umar obeyed. He performed ablution, walked back, and picked up the leather sheet. Umar held the parchment and began reading the opening verses of Surah Taha. Taha. We have not sent down to you the Quran to cause you distress, but only as a reminder for those who fear God. A revelation from He who created the earth and the highest heavens. Indeed, I am Allah. There is no deity except me, so worship me and establish prayer for my remembrance. The linguistic majesty of the text tore through Umar's defense mechanisms. The towering warrior dropped his head and began to weep. He whispered, "How beautiful and how noble are these words. Take me to Muhammad immediately." Khabbab emerged from the closet, shouting, "O Umar, I swear I hope that God has chosen you to answer the Prophet's prayer, for just yesterday I heard him say, 'O Allah, strengthen Islam with whichever of these two men is more beloved to you, Abu Jahl or Umar ibn al-Khattab.'" Umar marched to the house of al-Arqam, his sword still drawn. The companions looked through the peephole and panicked, but Hamza stood up and said, "Let him in. If he comes with good intentions, we will welcome him. If he comes with evil, we will execute him with his own sword." Umar entered, swore his allegiance to the Prophet, and shouted La ilaha illa Allah. The roar of Allahu Akbar from the house of al-Arqam was so thunderous that it echoed across the entire valley of Makkah. Umar immediately looked at the Prophet and asked, "Are we not upon the truth, whether we live or die?" The Prophet replied, "Yes." Umar declared, "Then why must we hide in the shadows? By God, we shall march out and pray openly at the Kaaba." For the first time, the Muslims marched out in two disciplined files, one led by Hamza and the other by Umar, and performed their prayers openly in front of a stunned, terrified Quraysh council. Umar was awarded the title al-Faruq, the discerner between truth and falsehood. Realizing that neither the conversions of military titans like Hamza and Umar nor psychological warfare could halt the momentum of the movement, the oligarchy of the Quraysh decided to launch a devastating, unprecedented measure, a total social and economic blockade against the entire Banu Hashim clan, who stubbornly refused to hand the Prophet over to be executed. The chieftains drafted a formal treaty, swearing that no one in Makkah would buy goods from the Banu Hashim, sell a single grain of food to them, marry their daughters, or engage in any communication with them. The document was signed by the elite leaders and hung inside the inner sanctuary of the Kaaba to give it divine legitimacy. For 3 devastating years, the Prophet, his family, and all members of his clan, both the Muslim converts and the non-Muslim clan members who stood by their ancestral codes of tribal solidarity, were forced out of their homes and blockaded inside a narrow, barren canyon outside the city known as Shib Abi Talib, the Valley of Abu Talib. The blockade was enforced with ruthless efficiency. Whenever a trading caravan arrived in Makkah, Abu Jahl would buy up all the food supplies at inflated prices to ensure none of it could leak into the canyon. Food supplies within the valley quickly dropped to absolute zero. The cries of starving infants and dying elders could be heard echoing from the rocky canyon walls all the way into the residential quarters of Makkah. The companion survived by chewing on the raw, bitter leaves of desert shrubs and boiling dried pieces of old camel hides to stave off starvation. Khadijah, a woman who had been raised in the lap of luxury as the richest noblewoman in Arabia, spent her entire multi-million-dollar fortune smuggling single sacks of flour into the valley to keep the children alive. Through 3 years of near-famine conditions, her health deteriorated drastically, yet her conviction never wavered. Throughout this horror, the Prophet's voice remained unbroken. He continued to use the sacred truce months to slip out of the canyon and preach the message to foreign travelers. The boycott was finally broken by a small group of non-Muslim Makkah noblemen who could no longer bear the horrific cruelty of the blockade. Hisham ibn Amr, Zuhair ibn Abi Umayyah, and Muttalib ibn Adi formed a secret alliance to dismantle the document. Zuhair marched into the Kaaba marketplace, wore his fine robes, and shouted to the crowd, "O people of Makkah! Shall we eat food and wear fine clothes while our brothers of the Banu Hashim are dying of starvation, unable to buy or sell? By God, I will not sit down until this unjust document is torn to pieces." Abu Jahl screamed, "You lie! It shall not be torn." But Muttalib ibn Adi and 3 other armed chiefs stepped forward to support Zuhair, drawing their swords to show they were ready to fight. At that exact moment, the Prophet informed his uncle Abu Talib that God had sent a revelation stating that termites had crawled inside the Kaaba and eaten the entire parchment of the boycott, leaving only the opening phrase, Bismika al-Aruma, in your name, O God. Muttalib ibn Adi reached up to tear down the scroll. To the shock of the assembled crowd, the paper crumbled into dust in his hands. Every single clause of oppression had been eaten away by insects, leaving nothing but the name of God intact. The blockade was broken. The community emerged from the valley emaciated, weak, and physically broken. But the relief was tragically cut short by the arrival of the ultimate testing ground. In the 10th year of his mission, within a span of just a few months, the two columns that supported his human existence collapsed entirely. First, his elderly uncle and protector, Abu Talib, fell gravely ill and passed away. With his death, the leadership of the Banu Hashim clan fell to Abu Lahab, who immediately revoked all traditional tribal protection from his nephew, declaring him an outlaw. Weeks later, Khadijah, his comfort, his confidant, his greatest human pillar, and the first soul to believe in his mission, closed her eyes for the last time. Islamic historians record this devastating period as Aam al-Huzn, the year of sorrow. He was now completely exposed. Any man in the streets of Makkah could strike him, spit on him, or plot his assassination without fear of triggering a tribal blood feud. Desperate to find a sanctuary for his persecuted followers, the Prophet decided to look outside Makkah. Accompanied only by his adopted son Zayd ibn Haritha, he hiked 40 miles through dangerous, rocky mountain passes to the high-altitude orchard city of Ta'if. Ta'if was the home of the powerful Thaqif tribe, known for their immense pride and wealth. He entered the council chambers of the three brother chiefs of Ta'if, Abdul, Marzud, and Habib. He sat before them, explained the message of Islam, and asked them to provide a sanctuary for his followers from the cruelty of the Quraysh. The response of the chiefs of Ta'if was dripping with elite arrogance and venom. The first brother sneered, "If God sent you as a prophet, I will rip the drapes of the Kaaba off their hinges." The second brother barked, "Could God find no one better than an orphan to send as a messenger?" The third brother refused to even look at him, saying, "I will not speak to you. For if you are truly a prophet, your status is too high for me to argue with. And if you are a liar, you are too base for me to waste my breath on." He stood up, his request rejected, and asked them for one final favor, to keep his visit secret so the Quraysh would not exploit his political vulnerability. The chiefs refused. Instead, they weaponized the street thugs, the slaves, and the children of Ta'if. They lined the narrow mountain exit paths of the city in 2 rows, forming a corridor of hatred. As he walked down the path, the mob began pelting him with heavy, jagged rocks, mocking him and shouting obscenities. Zayd ibn Haritha threw his own body in front of the Prophet, acting as a human shield, taking multiple severe blows to his head and limbs. The rocks struck the Prophet's shins and ankles continuously, breaking his skin. Blood flowed down his legs, dripping into his leather sandals until they were completely soaked and congealed with his own blood. He stumbled repeatedly, and whenever he fell, the mob would lift him back up by his arms just so they could throw more stones at him. They hunted him for miles out of the city gates until he collapsed into the shade of a private orchard belonging to 2 wealthy Makkan brothers, Utbah and Shayba ibn Rabi'ah, who watched from a distance with a mix of pity and tribal curiosity. Sitting under the shade of a grapevine, blood drying in his shoes, utterly rejected by both his hometown and the city of his refuge, he raised his trembling, blood-stained hands toward the sky. It was in this moment of total isolation that he delivered one of the most profound, emotionally shattering supplications in religious history, a prayer known as the Dua of Ta'if. "O Allah, To you alone I complain of my weakness, my lack of resources, and my insignificance before mankind. O most merciful of those who show mercy! You are the Lord of the weak, and you are my Lord. To whom do you entrust me? To a distant stranger who will mistreat me? Or to an enemy to whom you have given control over my affairs? If your anger is not against me, then I do not care about anything else. But your protection is wide enough for me. I seek refuge in the light of your face, by which all darkness is illuminated, and by which all affairs of this world and the next are set right, lest your anger descend upon me or your wrath engulf me. To you belongs all rights of compliance until you are pleased. And there is no power nor might except through you. The historical texts record that the heavens shook at the voice of this prayer. The archangel Jibril materialized before him, accompanied by the angel of the mountains. The angel of the mountains called out to him, saluted him with respect, and said, O Muhammad, God has heard what your people said to you, and he has sent me to execute your commands. If you wish, I will smash the two massive mountains of black rock surrounding this valley together, crushing the entire population of Tarif between them. He sat with blood drying in his sandals, his body broken. He looked up at the angel of the mountains, and instead of choosing vengeance, instead of wiping out the city that had stoned him, he shook his head and replied with a voice of pure compassion, No. I pray instead that God will bring forth from their descendants a generation of people who will worship God alone, without associating any partners with him. This moment defined the absolute psychological baseline of his mission. He was not a conqueror driven by ego or political rage. He was, as the text later defined him, a mercy to the worlds. He returned to Makkah, forced to enter under the private protection of a noble non-Muslim pagan chief, al-Mutim ibn Adi, who ordered his armed sons to guard the Prophet as he performed tawaf around the Kaaba to signal to Abu Jahl that he was under their clan's protection. The situation looked politically stagnant, but the architecture of destiny was moving rapidly behind the scenes during the annual Hajj trade fairs. Every year, tribes from all over Arabia converged on the outskirts of Makkah. He would walk through the encampments at night, introducing himself to different tribal councils, only to be rejected, insulted, or dragged away by his uncle Abu Lahab, who followed him shouting, Do not listen to him, he is a liar who wants you to abandon your gods. But during the Hajj season of the year 620, near the narrow mountain pass of al-Aqabah outside Makkah, he chanced upon a small group of 6 men sitting together. They belonged to the Khazraj tribe from a distant, war-torn oasis city located 250 miles to the north, Yathrib. Yathrib was a city trapped in a catastrophic cycle of civil wars between its 2 dominant pagan tribes, the Aws and the Khazraj. Furthermore, the city was home to powerful Jewish tribes who frequently warned the pagans that a final prophet was destined to arrive soon, under whose leadership the old systems of oppression would be shattered. The prophet sat with the 6 men, recited the Quran to them, and explained the foundational concepts of Islam. The men looked at each other in shock. They whispered among themselves, By God, you know this is the very same prophet whom the Jews have been warning us about. Let them not precede us in following him. The 6 men accepted Islam on the spot and returned to Yathrib, acting as the first ambassadors of the faith. The message spread through the palm groves of the oasis like wildfire. The following year, they brought 12 leaders to swear the first pledge of al-Aqabah, an oath focused on personal morality and monotheism. But in the year 622, the destiny of the movement was permanently secured. A secret delegation of 72 tribal leaders from both the Aws and Khazraj tribes traveled to Makkah under the cover of the pagan Hajj caravan. In the middle of the night, while the rest of the caravan slept, they slipped out to the pass of al-Aqabah to meet the Prophet, who was accompanied by his uncle al-Abbas, who had not yet converted but wanted to ensure his nephew's safety. The leader of the Medinan delegation, al-Bara ibn Mara, stood up and said, "O Messenger of God, we give our allegiance to you. What are your conditions?" The Prophet spoke, reciting the Quran, and laid down his terms. "I ask for your allegiance that you shall protect me against all targets just as you protect your own wives and your own children." The fierce warrior al-Bara took the Prophet's hand and shouted, "By he who sent you with the truth, we shall protect you as we protect our own families. We are men of war, raised on battlefield tactics, inherited from our forefathers." Another chief, Asad ibn Zurara, stepped forward, held the Prophet's hand, and turned to the delegation, reminding them of the weight of their choice. "Do you realize what you are swearing to this man tonight? You are swearing an oath to go to war against the red and black nations of the earth. If you think that if your wealth is destroyed and your noble leaders are killed you will hand him over, then leave him now, for that would be a disgrace in this world and the next. But if you are ready to stand by him through total destruction, then take his hand, for by God, this is the finest reward." The 72 chiefs shouted in unison, "We take him through the destruction of our property and the loss of our lives. What is our reward if we stay true to this covenant, O Messenger of God?" The Prophet looked at them and gave a single-word response. "Al-Jannah, paradise." They replied, "Stretch out your hand." He stretched out his hand, and the 72 leaders clasped their hands over his, signing the historical blueprint for the sovereign state of Medina. Makkah had spent 13 years trying to suffocate, crush, and extinguish the spark of Islam. They had weaponized elite wealth, brutal torture, social isolation, and systematic starvation. But as the companions began quietly slipping out of the city in the dead of night, leaving behind their ancestral homes, their businesses, and their wealth, the Quraysh realized they had failed completely. The spark had outgrown the valley. It was heading to Medina, where it would transform from a persecuted minority into a sovereign civilization. The birth of Islam in Makkah was complete. The 13 years of crucible within this valley had forged a community of iron discipline, absolute conviction, and unbreakable brotherhood. Makkah was the womb of the faith, but the open horizon of the world was now waiting. The story of Makkah teaches us that the grandest historical movements in human history often begin in absolute isolation, in a tiny, dark cave on a forgotten mountain ridge. It shows that integrity, truthfulness, and character are the necessary foundations before any message can alter the course of empires. If you want to understand how this community survived the subsequent battles of Banu Hud, and how they eventually returned to open the gates of Makkah peacefully years later, make sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on your notification bell, and leave a comment below telling us which historical figure from early Islam inspires you the most. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next chronicle.